All living organisms are intimately connected to the energy waves of the universe. Our Creator designed a symphonic relationship between these organisms, light, and the energy fields of nature. We are encompassed by this symphony of harmony.
Welcome back to Session 3, Creation in Symphony. In the last session, we talked about days 1 and 2 of creation in the creation model. In the first session, we learned that evolution just won't work. In fact, Wolfgang Smith, PhD, physicist and mathematician, recently wrote in a globally respected journal, a growing number of respectable scientists are defecting from the evolutionist camp. Moreover, for the most part, these experts have abandoned Darwinism not on the basis of religious faith or biblical persuasions, but on strictly scientific grounds. There is a basis lacking for evolutionary plausibility. There is a basis that is solidly entrenched in scientific research supporting the creation model. Yesterday, or in the last session, we talked about a firmamental canopy above the globe created on day number 2. This is called the rakia in the original Hebrew language. I brought to the session today a photograph taken recently and I believe displayed in Discover magazine, which shows that today there is a buildup of ice particles 50 miles above the globe. These ice particles are consistent in large sheet layers. And what this really shows is that in certain areas of the magnetic field, there can be a natural occurrence of sheets and layers of ice that can be radiating the glow of planetary structures and the glow of the sun. Now, you'll remember I spoke in the last session about the fact that we're losing the strength of the geomagnetic field. Physicists have found that when a field is strengthened, it pinches or has a radius that is much tighter. Well, in the current situation where we do not have a recharged context with the cosmic energy lacking in recharging the magnetic field because we are lacking the firmamental canopy above that field, we do not have the recharge mechanism, so these lines of force have loosened or broadened out. Today they extend 40,000 miles out into space. However, during a period of solar flares or sunspots, that additional cosmic energy causes these lines to concentrate. What this shows is cosmic energy does share a recharging of the Earth's magnetic field if there is a mechanism to keep it in place. And 50 miles above the Earth, there is at least a limber, low moment, low energy field or line of flux sufficient to hold some of these ice particles in place. Now, I spoke also in the last session about the fact that there is a design in the universe suitable for man. Let's dwell on that from the academic standpoint. During recent years, physicists have been preoccupied with a concept that is extremely interesting. And the concept is this: the universe is so spaced and so designed from the proton, the electron, the nucleus, the energy of the atom, the individual atoms themselves, the effect of star bodies, including our solar system with its planets and sun, the effect of all of the marshaled unit of the universe, all designed for some reason with man in mind. It's called the anthropic principle. Evolutionists are adrift today on how to explain how all of this could have happened. In fact, the best explanation they have is we live in a very fortunate window of the evolution of the universe where the separation, cosmic separation of star bodies and star clusters and the shells of star clusters are just right. Space is sufficiently large. The solar system has evolved to an intricate point with refinement to the degree of 10 to the 55th power in precision, so that currently in this very fortunate window, man can evolve and survive. Well, that's very interesting. It's very convenient to say it's fortunate at this moment. A far more plausible explanation, a far more academic explanation, is to realize that the entire universe was created for the benefit of the man that is looking at this video at this moment. You were in mind in the Creator's design. Let me express this from various scholars. Physicist Rees and Carr, in Nature magazine, a very highly respected scientific journal globally published, wrote an article called The Anthropic Principle and the Structure of the Physical Universe. Now, anthropos has to do with man. That's the Greek for man. The anthropic principle and the very structure of the universe. Class, what I'm really trying to say is this universe, from the microcosm to the macrocosm, from the very tiny to the extremely enlarged, has all been designed with you in mind. Now here's what these physicists found. They calculated the mass of the cosmos from the atom to the entire universe, and they found that the size of planet Earth is a geometric mean, an average, a unit, a geometric mean of the size of the entire universe. Let me say that again. They found that the size, mass, and volume of the Earth is a direct geometric mean to the size of the universe. So planet Earth figures into this prominently. They also found that the mass of the human body is a geometric mean of the mass of the proton and the planet itself. So this means that it's not the cats and the canaries, as delightful as they are. It's not the reeds and the palms and the ferns, as delightful as they are. But the entire universe and planet Earth and man have an infrastructure of design. Also the reeds and the ferns and the insects and the birds all figure into this design, but for the benefit of man. They found that these proportions further relate to the electromagnetic and gravitational constants. They're not simply physical particles themselves exclusively. Well, it looks like this universe was designed for man, and that is the principle of creation in Symphony, the composite creation model. In the last session, I talked about the fact that on day number 2, the Creator said, "Let there be a firmament." And He designed above the earth this very thin, transparent for the most part, transparent fiber optic, superconductive canopy above the earth. That canopy would have kept the atmospheric gases in place, and those atmospheric gases were provided on day number 3. We do not have that canopy today, and we are the worse off for not having that canopy today. In fact, one of our consultants, Dale Peterson, MD, wrote a very fine scholastic research project called Longevity and the Biblical Record. And he said excess free radicals attach themselves to cell membranes. Let's go back a step. In the last session, we learned that as the ultraviolet radiation penetrates through the atmosphere down to surface Earth, it excites the oxygen molecules and other molecules as well, but primarily oxygen is a very radical agent when charged by ultraviolet radiation. It excites that, free radicalizes the oxygen molecule and others, so that we ingest those and we're being contaminated. In fact, Dr. Peterson, who is on faculty, adjunct faculty, University of Oklahoma School of Medicine, former faculty member at Wisconsin School of Medicine, has written, excess free radicals generated by this lack of the canopy attach themselves to cell membranes, LDL cholesterol, and even DNA. They penetrate right inside the cell membrane. Damage done to the human body is enormous. The list of conditions felt to be caused by or aggravated by free radicals includes arteriosclerosis, Alzheimer's, cancer, high blood pressure, schizophrenia, Parkinson's disease, Down syndrome, strokes, cataracts, arthritis, emphysema, dandruff, wrinkles, memory loss, mental sluggishness. Over 60 disease states are felt by a number of researchers to be caused by or aggravated by these free radicals. Now, prior to the flood, when we lost that canopy, those free radicals would not be generated because the ultraviolet radiation would be trapped along with other shortwave radiation, thus energizing the geomagnetic field and not penetrating for the detriment of man. This session will have to do with day 3 and day 4 of creation in an orchestrated design or creation in symphony. A friend of mine, Paul Taylor, has written a splendid book, Illustrated Origin Answers, and he has listed 102 academic processes showing the earth to be very young. I would recommend that you get that particular book by Paul Taylor. We're talking about days of creation and a recent creation. John Morris, very fine friend of the museum and of creation research worldwide, published a book recently called The Young Earth. I recommend you get The Young Earth by John Morris. In The Young Earth, this very fine scholar asked the question, how long is a day? The Hebrew word yom is the word translated day from the Old Testament. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void. Darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. The light He called day, and the darkness He called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. How long was that day? Dr. Morris points out that there are various ways that the word day can be used. As a solar day, essentially a 24-hour day, daylight, just 1/2 of a day, or indefinite periods of time. And he states appropriately that this word yom occurs 2,291 times in the Old Testament, and it almost always means a literal day. When used in the plural form yomim, 845 times, it always refers to a literal day. When modified by a numerical or an ordinal in historical narrative, 359 times in the Old Testament, like Genesis 1, it always means a literal day. And each time it was modified. And the evening and the morning were the first day, and the evening and the morning were the second day. And on the 7th day, God rested. When modified by evening and morning, 38 times outside of Genesis 1, it always means a literal day. So it certainly would mean the same in Genesis 1. It forms a basis for our work week of 6 literal days, Exodus chapter 20. Now, proper interpretation is a solar day, not indefinite periods of time. On day number 3 of creation, God said, let the dry land appear, and the dry land appeared. That dry land involves the entire infrastructure, involves the core of the earth, involves the surface structure. The water was already there, and it involves particularly the granite. I spoke to you in session number 1 about the granite. According to the evolutionary model, this granite worldwide, which today averages between 8 and 16 miles in thickness, depending on whether it's been crumpled into mountain formations or is simply underlying the basic strata of the earth. This granite, according to evolutionary hypothesis, took 300 million years to crystallize. But according to the biblical record on day number 3, God said, let the dry land appear, and the dry land appeared. Is that plausible? Dr. Robert Gentry, to whom I referred in the first session, did some marvelous work in which he showed that the inclusions, the little pleochroic halos, the tiny little rings of energy circling the nucleus of a body, or circling the area where a body of radioactive material has transmuted to another element. Dr. Gentry found the rings left by polonium-218, polonium-210, and polonium-214. The half-life of polonium-210 is 22 days. Now, remember that after 7 half-lives, all of that particular radioactive material is gone. So the least the day, at the outside, the day would have to be just a few weeks, even if it were outside the literal day. But it cannot work outside a literal day. Not only did Dr. Gentry find the pleochroic halos of polonium-210, but he found the halos left by polonium-218. The half-life of polonium-218 is less than 3 minutes. In 20 minutes, all of the polonium-218 in a body of polonium-218 would be gone. So in a matter of minutes, that crust had to be formed. The granite had to be intact and functioning and recording. But it's better still. Dr. Gentry found that polonium-214, whose half-life is 0.000164 seconds, 164 milliseconds, after 7 half-lives had elapsed, you certainly could not have even snapped your finger. Faster than we can snap a finger, all of the polonium-214 would be gone. That means that it had to be crystallized, functional, and recording in a very brief period of time. That has to be a literal day. Now, not only is the surface structure a design, but the internal structure was designed with moderating elements that are radioactive. Remember that water is heated up by radioactivity. Remember that 40 feet of water will stop even very powerful radiation in the gamma range level. The structure is that inside the earth there are moderating elements that give off a gentle heat. Watch this closely. The purpose of radioactive materials is to generate heat. I live a few miles from the Comanche Peak nuclear reactor. The purpose of that reactor is to simply, with the right amount of fissionable material, with the right amount of that fissionable material, to put it close enough together so that it'll heat up the water, to generate steam, to drive the turbines, to generate electricity. Very simple and forthright. Radioactive material is designed to give off heat. Watch closely. Before the flood of Noah's day, this firmamental canopy was in place from day 2 all the way to the first day of the flood. It filtered out shortwave radiation. It filtered out some of the infrared radiation, which means that we would only have a gentle temperature buildup during the light of day. Now, plants, botanists tell us, do so much better if you generate pink light for them. We have scientific data showing that. Remember that the color of that was a gentle pink, magenta. That triggers the growth and reproductive cells of plants. In addition to that, plants do better if the roots are heated 2 or 3 degrees above the ambient temperature. Everything is designed for the optimal genetic function of all living systems, the earth and the entire universe. So we have a structure built inside the earth which will gently radiate nuclear reaction, which will gently heat up the waters, which will gently warm the roots of the plants. How large did those plants get? Well, I'll have to give you an illustration. Let me build the context. Here we have an envelope in place, keeping the atmospheric pressure in place. Later I'll refer to stats showing that Neil Teague, one of our very fine consultants, given the indication that geophysicists know the earth has expanded, has refined the diameter of the earth. It was approximately 10% less. It has expanded at the time of Noah's flood and Peleg, which we will study later in these sessions. Don't miss a single session. Given a 90% diameter of the earth before the flood, given the additional gravitational attraction, given the compression of this bubble of water with very thin metallic hydrogen suspended inside this crystalline structure, altogether that would compress the atmosphere to 28 pounds per square inch. Our refined consideration is today 14.7 pounds per square inch at sea level, but we added essentially another atmosphere pressure due to the conditions I've just described, which means we had hyperbaric atmospheric pressure, twice our current atmospheric pressure. Also, geologists have found in the structure of the limestones a greater amount of carbon dioxide, essentially 8 times our current amount. We currently have 0.026% carbon dioxide. We, at that time, would have had just about 0.25% carbon dioxide. Greater atmospheric pressure, filtration of the ultraviolet, generation of pink light, and gentle heating of the plant. What will this do? In the fossil record, everything is bigger. Everything is larger. We're talking about day number 3. We first had the structure of the earth, and then we had the plants created on day number 3. Now, these plants were created completely functional. Remember, on day number 1, this sphere of water was completely created functional as a sphere of water. On day number 2, the crystalline firmament was functional. On day number 3, the intrastructure of the earth, internal and surface, were totally functional. Remember, it was functional faster than we can snap our fingers. Also, the plant life created on day number 3 was totally functional, with immediate youth, but functional maturity. Class, remember that expression, immediate youth and functional maturity. Let me prove it to you that the biblical record, which is the manual of scientific creation, the biblical record shows clearly that this was the case. The Creator on day number 3 created the plants, or the vines, the fruit was on the vine, and the seed was in the fruit. That meant that the moment they were created, they were functionally mature, yet young, healthful, ready to be devoured or ready to be harvested, ready to reproduce or ready to be harvested. How big do those plants get? Today we have a plant called the lycopsid club moss. The tallest we can grow it is about 16, maybe 18 inches. But in the fossil record, that very same plant got up to 120 feet tall. How do we explain that? The evolutionary scenario does not even attempt to explain it, but the creation model, particularly this creation model, creation in Symphony, can explain it. Not long ago, an outstanding scientist at Keio University, Tokyo, Japan, Dr. Ki Mori, planted a single tomato plant. Now, he planted this tomato plant in his basement of all places. He had his office in the basement, and the Japanese are very fond of having all the physical world expressed in miniature. He planted a nice little cherry tomato plant. You're aware of the fact that the cherry tomato plant gets bush high. The mature tomato is the size of a cherry, maybe the size of a quarter. And he planted his tomato plant in his basement. It was growing fairly well, but he needed more light. He didn't want to bring in more electricity, so he had a brilliant idea. Out at the university, he had some fiber optic cable. He brought it home, ran it out the roof of his house, through his attic, the rafters, down the walls to his basement, and directed it toward his plant. Now, it worked beautifully. It picked up the rays of the sun, transferred them down, shone them directly on his plant. And what Dr. Mori forgot was fiber optic cable filters out ultraviolet radiation like water filters out ultraviolet radiation, and like that firmament above the earth would have filtered out ultraviolet radiation as long as it was in place until the time of Noah's flood. So the light he was getting on his tomato plant was essentially like the light we had before Noah's flood. Let's see what happened to his tomato plant. It started to grow extremely well. He knew he had something. In fact, it grew so well he had to take it out of his basement. He took it over to his lab, built a special platform, built a canopy filtering out ultraviolet radiation. But he knew the plant wanted more carbon dioxide and nutrients than it could get normally. So, brilliant scholar. He used a pliable gasket at the top of the stalk, one at the bottom, designed a cylinder, added atmospheric pressure to get the stalk to accept more carbon dioxide and more nutrients. Wonderful. It would have been better had the entire plant been encapsulated in greater atmospheric pressure, but that's very expensive to do. So, essentially, he was simulating the creation model to a great degree. Before the flood, we had the greater atmospheric pressure, the greater concentration of carbon dioxide, filtration of ultraviolet, etc. Now his plant grew wild. Let's see what happened to it. Here's a photo of his plant after 2 years. His tomato plant is a tree, 16 feet tall, with 903 tomatoes on it. And those cherry tomatoes are not cherry tomato size. They are baseball size. But that's not the end of the story. That's after 2 years. His plant is now about 14 years old. It is still being maintained. He had to take it inside a huge hotel. It is now approximately 40 feet tall, has approximately 15,000 baseball-sized cherry tomatoes on it. What I'm trying to say is, if we simulate the conditions before Noah's flood, we get a wonderful result and we produce specimens that are approximately the size of specimens caught in the worldwide flood laid down in the fossil record. So the fossil record does not illustrate millions of years of evolutionary progression. The fossil record represents layer upon layer of sedimentary deposit that occurred just a few hours apart in a global flood. The creation model works. I think we've seen that there's design in this entire area of creation. But let's just see how designed it is. I brought to studio a sketch. I've mentioned again and again in this series of lectures that all of the creation is intrastructured. The cell, every component of the cell is interdependent and codependent. We're now learning that the entire universe is orchestrated for the benefit of man. And if the proton, scholars have found that if the proton did not have its specific charge, then the hemoglobin, with an iron atom with a number of other atoms surrounding it, the hemoglobin would not have the right charge to pick up the oxygen to transfer it to the body. If the spin of the proton, the mass of the proton, and the behavior of the proton were not precise, you couldn't get blood to live. That means the universe has to be at a perfectly orchestrated balance. Wow, that's interrelationship. But now, upon earth, there's an interrelationship. I've emphasized that the days of creation have to be solar days, have to be literal days, essentially 24-hour days. Let me show you how this is verified in creation. On day number 3, we had the plants created. One of those plants is a particular variety of fig. But that particular fig cannot be procreated without a fig wasp that is designed especially for its benefit. Now remember, we're just on day number 3 during this creation. It is not until days 5 and 6 that the insects are created. So if those days were long periods of time, this particular variety of fig would see its demise long before its procreating wasp arrived. Let me show you how intrastructured this really is. Inside the fig, there are closed flowers out of which a male wasp emerges. He was laid in there and hatched in there. Immediately, instantly, in the darkness, he is designed to do the following. He searches for the female wasps who have not yet emerged. He fertilizes them. Then he does one other thing. He digs a hole, drills a hole, eats a hole from the inside of the fig to the surface shell of the fig. Then he retreats and dies. His job's over. Hours later, the female wasp proceeds. She hatches, arrives. Now, she immediately goes through the hole dug by her brother, the male counterpart. She goes to another fig, just like it. She enters and starts searching for the flowers. Now, before she exits the first one, being feminine, she has to inspect the whole house. So, this female wasp, just hatched, checks all the flowers. And as she checks them, the pollen gets all over her. Then she exits the hole, the channel, dug by or eaten by her brother. She then proceeds, goes inside the next fig by a special channel that is one way only. She then inspects two kinds of flowers. One is the male that has antlers. She, of course, has pollen from the first fig. She, from that first fig, then pollinates the male flowers. Then she goes to the female flower, which does not have the antlers. She deposits eggs, and then she dies. The cycle is over. And the only way this fig can be pollinated is by that particular wasp. In other words, the creation of day number 3 could not have continued had these been long periods of time before that particular wasp was created. The evolutionists have a very difficult time explaining that principle. It's called a symbiotic relationship. One depends on the other. Each of these life forms depend on the other. So day number 3 of creation was orchestrated. That brings us to day number 4. On day number 4, the stellar heavens were created. Remember a principle that has been clearly rendered in this series. All of the creation was immediately young, no scars, no mutations. Everything with optimal genetic expression. Immediate youth, but functional maturity. On day number 1 of creation, we find the light expressed from the Creator Himself. That light flooded the entire universe. Now think about that for a moment. If light flooded the entire universe, leading evolutionary scholars have published that light did flood the entire universe. If a Big Bang occurred, it had to occur with the following statistics. In 10 to the minus 30th of a second, that small unit of light and energy had to expand 10 to the 50th power of dimensions. I asked one of NASA's very fine engineers to put that in his computer. He came back to me a few hours later and he said, "Now you want me to take a very small bit of energy, 10 to the minus 30th of a second expanding, and its dimension is infinite, the size of a pinhead, and in the time expressed of 10 to the minus 30th of a second, you want me to expand that 10 to the 50th dimensions." Correct. That's what the evolutionary astrophysicists have suggested would be plausible. He came back a few hours later and he said, that is infinite velocity that would flood the universe completely with light. Well, now we're not saying it began with that explosion. That is not our thesis at all. We're saying the Creator stated, "Let there be light," and there was light, and God saw the light that it was good, and that light flooded the entire universe. Physicists have admitted that in light is the necessary energy for the functioning and later transmutation of all the physical elements in the star bodies. So these two models parallel. It's just that the time is entirely different, and it is that, according to the evolutionary model, time, chance, and natural circumstances become the hero of the plot, when in the creation model, it is a purposefully divine orchestrated creation committed by an intelligent, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient Creator God. So, on day number 1 of creation, the universe was flooded with light. If in all the other areas of the creation you have immediate youth and functional maturity, then it's certainly plausible that on day number 4, when God coalesced the stellar bodies into place, the blazing suns and whirling galaxies, He did that with immediate youth and functional maturity. I've had individuals say, now wait a minute, how are you going to get the energy back to planet Earth? Watch closely. How big is the universe? I don't know. It's as big as the Creator wants it to be. There are a lot of postulates, but no one knows for sure except the Creator Himself. No matter how big it is, it's no problem in the creation model. You see, I type. I go ... I push a carriage, it comes back. The typewriter carriage comes back, I go ... push a carriage, it comes back. Now we work with a computer. We work on a screen, we push a button. That computer printer goes zip, 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 zip. There are computer printers that can start from the bottom and print from the top simultaneously. I was lecturing on this in Oklahoma City. One of our consultants, Dr. Dale Peterson, came up and he said, you're right, but it's better than that. He said, I have a new computer. I type what I want. I can schematically design a universe on the screen. I push the button and the printer goes splat and prints it all simultaneously. Now, don't you think God's a little smarter than we are? If we're at the point where in our universal expression, we can instantly get all of the data aligned logically, systematically, intelligently, where it all benefits the design we're asking for. If we can do that with our creativity, it's simply orders of magnitude for the Creator who is in charge of all of it to do the very same thing. Stellar bodies were in place systematically. Let me give you some data that I think would be interesting. A number of scholars have wrestled with the problem, do we have a geocentric universe or a heliocentric solar system? Well, let's see. Geocentric means that the sun would revolve around the earth and the stars would revolve around the earth. Heliocentric, of course, would mean that in the solar system you have the earth revolving around the sun and then the sun going through his circuits of the entire universe. Which is true? Sir Frederick Hoyle, one of the world's leading academicians, has stated recently, geocentricity is the Copernican theory or the Ptolemaic theory correct? Copernican theory is heliocentricity. Ptolemaic theory is geocentricity. Which is correct? Dr. Hoyle stated, and he is certainly not a creationist in our sense of the word. He began as an atheist and certainly as an evolutionist, but has found that the data does not support that position. Dr. Hoyle said, the relation of the two pictures, geocentricity or heliocentricity, is reduced to a mere coordinate transformation. And it is the main tenet of the Einstein theory that any two ways of looking at the world which are related to each other by a coordinate transformation are entirely equivalent from a physical point of view. So, from the physical point of view, you can refer either way. So, when the Bible refers to the sun rising and setting, not only is that an earth-centered concept, but that's an Einsteinian concept as well. Some vast bodies have been found out in the universe. Let's take a look at a very special display. I want to talk to you about some academic research before we look at this in some detail. Margaret Geller and John Hutcha of Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics found a great wall out in the universe. 500 million light years across, 300 million light years high, and 15 million light years thick. Johns Hopkins University, in conjunction with the University of Illinois, found superclusters that I'll illustrate in just a moment, appearing at regular intervals 400 million light years apart. 7 separate clumps to the north and 7 separate clumps of superclusters to the south in the galactic or in the universal sense. Now, did you get that? I've been illustrating the creation in symphony model. I've been trying to emphasize the fact that it's all designed. They're now in a major quandary, trying to understand how all of this could have been structured by evolutionary processes, when instead it appears to be structured independent of those processes and by a specific design. In the 1600s, a star in the constellation of Cygnus became bright. It's called P Cygni. It was half again as bright in the 1700s as it is today. What this means is astrophysicists are finding that that star is aging too fast. And that means that its entire history can be calculated in hundreds of years, not in thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. There's an intrastructure that is very young. In trapezium, in the Orion Nebula, 4 stars are moving apart from a common point at high speed. Out in the constellations, in one particular area in the Orion Nebula, that's part of the Milky Way galaxy that you'll see in a moment illustrated, 4 stars are moving apart from a common point at high speed. At that speed, that common point would have converged just 10,000 years ago. I'm trying to say everything is orchestrated. A leading scholar recently published in Scientific American, previously it seemed scientifically unsound to have light created before the sun. The present scientific view does indeed assume the early universe to be filled with various kinds of radiation. He said that's consistent with the biblical statement, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now, let's illustrate this particular chart. Our point is that not only is the creation orchestrated, designed, but it is orchestrated and designed by a creator. There's only one plausible creator whose work matches that of the rest of the data, and that is the creator of the Bible expressed in the person of Jesus Christ. Let's see if the constellatory bodies have anything to do with consistency with what he claimed to be. First of all, there's Polaris, the North Star. That's used for direction. The creator of the Bible and the creator in this model have an invitation for us to follow that creator in purposeful meaning to life. To show and locate the North Star, we have a system called the Big Dipper, and one of the stars from the outer bowl points directly to the North Star. This is a cluster of 7 stars, and a central star gives it its very meaning. It's called Mizar, and it has to do with the sheepfold. We call this Ursa Major. However, it actually is not a bear with a long tail. No one saw a bear with a long tail. The very meaning of the stars themselves in the composite indicates a sheepfold with special care by the shepherd. And then the handle points to Arcturus, which is a primary star in the constellation of Bootes, the shepherd. So we have a design indicated here. Leadership, guidance, a fold, and a shepherd to do the designing. That shepherd is not simply sufficient for our needs, but in the constellation of Leo, he is seen as the lion of the tribe of Judah, totally consistent with his own power to create the universe. He is also seen in Gemini as dual nature, the God-man, and he certainly manifests himself as the God-man. in this universe. He is also expressed in Virgo, holding the scepter. And here we've envisioned that Creator with the scepter in His hands in His lap. We have had, already illustrated previously, the beautiful design of star clusters. We've abbreviated these into 7 from the Great Wall in the center, with 4 on each side, or 3 on each side, but there actually are 7 to the north and 7 to the south, spaced 400 million light years apart. Design which evolutionary hypothesis cannot understand. Let's illustrate that again. Finally, a glorious array to this central display of the Creator's handiwork is further outline of Himself, and finally, the Milky Way as a tremendous canopy of joy, emphasis, and glory to the Creator Himself. There is further design in this creation which will require additional information for us to present. Let me conclude this particular lecture by pointing to the solar system itself. The solar system is composed of course, the Sun, Mercury, Mars, Earth. We have the interior planets, the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Earth. And then with Mars as the starting point here, we have, of course, Jupiter, some asteroids. We have Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Kepler felt that the vibratory cycle in the elliptical union of these planets with the Sun would indeed give off a musical note. Not only are these spaced intricately for influences, for biological influences, that is not to say that your life is determined by astrology. By no means we condemn that position. But the Bible clearly indicates that everything was orchestrated for the benefit of man. Kepler was right. It has recently been found that the idea of celestial notes has a valid basis, since musical notes are always produced by repeated regular vibrations, whether originating from vibrating strings, reeds, or drum membranes. As the planets circle the Sun, the motion of each one is unique in its form in a slow, regular vibration. Don DeYoung, splendid researcher. And of course, all of the masses, charges, and other properties of the subatomic particles, according to Science magazine, arise from vibrations at different frequencies, a uniform chorus of violins playing a symphony of different notes. Now, wait a moment. Science magazine article recently admitted that the entire universe is producing a symphony. Kepler did excellent work to show that particular notes from B and G and C sharp and E flat and F and E flat, and additionally C, G, E, F sharp, etc., all were inherently involved in the constellary or orbital operation of the planets. Now we find the universe bringing symphony to us. Sky and Telescope magazine stated, as if by a chain, our planet's surface is connected intimately with the space environment. And then Uranus and Neptune, according to a special publication in a secular journal, have great pressures of extreme heat, so that all the carbon atoms have been compressed into diamonds. Let's take this a little further. With these very large planets having a diamond infrastructure, with a vibratory cycle, it has been found in some of NASA's research that there are literal tones emanating from some of these planets that they've been able to analyze. Robert Whitelow wrote of harmony in the heavens. He's a very fine scholar at Virginia Polytechnic. Robert Whitelow indicated that these planetary alignments and their masses and the area they sweep out not only sweep the very same amount of space in proportion to their velocity, but they're all related to various instruments, at least mathematically. It is stated that Pythagoras had reported that he could hear the celestial sounds. None of his disciples could, however. Now, the notes played, current secular astrophysicists admit that because of the vibratory cycle and because of the spherical alignment around the sun in the rotations, these particular notes would be played, and some of them indicate actual melody. Shakespeare wrote, "Look now in Merchant of Venice, how the floor of heaven is thick, inlaid with patines of bright gold. There's not the smallest orb which thou beholdest, but in his motion like an angel sings. Such harmony is in immortal souls. But whilst this muddy vesture of clay doth grossly close it in, we cannot hear it, or can we?" Work has been done to show in 21st century science and technology that there is a relationship, a conical relationship, with this musical scale in orbits of the planets and the biological systems. They have published data to show that the antenna of the DNA actually picks up vibratory cycles. They've illustrated this as the DNA is tuned or energized by these vibratory cycles. Let's take it one step further. In the book of Job, chapter 38, verse 7, the Creator said to the patriarch Job, "Were you there when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" Some of our researchers have found cause to believe that the firmament in its crystalline capacity matched precisely the ingredients of a crystal radio receiver, with a crystal, an antenna. Water makes a very good antenna, and you will find the crystalline metallic hydrogen intercomposition to complement that. A crystal, an antenna, an energy field, and the Bible does specifically state that it's the morning stars that sang. What we're finding is all of the stars sing to us. All of the planets sing to us. All of the energy of radiation in its vibratory cycle sings to us. But we're learning that if it's the morning stars singing, there is a real plausibility factor indicating that that canopy could actually pick up and audibilize that music so that individuals could hear it. In fact, a physicist whose name is Torelli, a lady, recently received her PhD doing research on the radio signals coming from pulsars. And she stated in a science journal recently that we actually are being hugged by this cosmic radio energy. And she actually took the digitalized information that's there, transferred it, and produced a tape, audibilized it. And it actually is a soothing, healthful hugging of cosmic radiation. One missionary from Alaska wrote that within the last few years, near the top of the globe, near the area where the concentrated lines of energy are stronger in moment and energy, that some of the missionaries and Eskimos actually report notes, audible notes, being heard because of the ice crystals in the charged lines of energy. I highly suspect that before the flood, each morning, when the rays of energy were just right, when the energy level was appropriate, we could pick up some of the soothing background music that the stars, particularly the pulsars, are giving off, with a background harmonious solar system actually blending in so that we could feel and sometime hear the music of the spheres. There's much more to come. Don't miss the next section.
The orchestration you just learned about did not develop by an accident of nature. In our next session, we will observe the footprints of a supernatural agency. The God of creation has a specific identity. There is no mistaking His existence or His handiwork. Follow in His footsteps and appreciate His handiwork as our speaker lights the way.
Welcome to the fourth session of Creation in Symphony. In the last session, we considered day number 4 of creation, the stellar heavens. And I think it would be appropriate that we tie that with day number 5. The point of Creation in Symphony as a model is that the entire creation is interrelated and interdependent upon the Creator Himself. Is the universe a young universe? We have various suggestions that the redshift indicates that the universe is old. The redshift indication is a calculation whereby galaxies or stars receding at a very fast rate deep in space would give off colors that would tend toward the red. However, Dr. Arp has published an entire book. He's a world-class astronomer, and he has published data showing that the redshift has nothing to do with velocities and distance. It has to do with the nature of life, light, and can have to do with the intergalactic particles themselves. Dr. Wolf has found that optically, these data show that light itself has the characteristics of tending toward the red, has nothing to do with velocity. Therefore, the handle on how old the universe is very shaky. In our opinion, the universe is a part of the original design just a few thousands of years ago. Let me give a bit of substantiating information to indicate that the universe is not nearly as old as it had been previously calculated to be. Dr. Hadley Wood, in Unveiling the Universe, a secular publication, stated, "We know of no process that can maintain a spiral arm for more than 2 galactic revolutions." You know, of course, there are beautiful and gorgeous deep space galaxies that have spiral arms. And he said, we know of no process that can maintain a spiral arm for more than 2 galactic revolutions. Dr. C.B. Clausen, in Exploring the Distant Stars, again a secular publication, wrote, "If this theory is true, the universe is young since it has so many rapidly revolving spirals." Indications and data are mounting that the universe is not nearly as old as we had postulated that it would be. An evolutionist and an astronomer, Jeffrey Burbridge, former director of Kitt Peak National Observatory, relating to the information I just gave to you, stated that evidence of this kind exists. If it is accepted, it means 3 things. Number 1, that at least some quasars do not lie at so-called cosmological distances. Very interesting. Number 2, that at least some parts of the redshift of quasars are due to some effect other than the expansion of the universe. Very interesting. Number 3, that quasars are physically related to bright, comparatively nearby galaxies. And of course, the Creator could have extended the galaxies as far as He wanted, and He created those in cluster bands, systematically orchestrated throughout the universe. In so doing, He had a design and a purpose. Frank Wilson, a secular writer, stated, comparing all of this universe with its fine-tuned increments to 10th to the 55th power of tuning and refinement. Very convenient. Frank Wilson wrote that the mind of man can influence the material world at the basic level of quarks and electrons. Now we get into a subject which shows that we as individuals watching this videotape at the moment, communicating, conversing with each other, have thought processes that actually have to do with the symmetry or the chaos, cooperation or chaos in the universe. We have been designed in the image of the Creator Himself. We've been given a free will to operate, and it appears that we will be held accountable for our influence far beyond that of the immediate relationships that we have. So Frank Wilson wrote, the mind of man can influence the material world at its basic level of quarks and electrons. Dr. Kevin MacLeod, a creation researcher, reported that French physicists stated that school children, after their experiments had been done, they published that school children, by thought alone, can alter the decay rate of radioactive emission. That is absolutely amazing. It appears that we too are a part of the entire universe at the basic level, and all of this has to be by design. Paul Davies, in Cosmic Blueprint, a secular evolutionary astrophysicist and physicist, wrote, the impression of design is overwhelming. The universal impression of design is overwhelming. Astronomer George Greenstein wrote, as we survey all the evidence, the thought insistently arises that some supernatural agency, or capital A in the agency, must be involved, and the capitalization is his choice. Is it possible that suddenly, without intending to, we have stumbled upon scientific proof of the existence of a supreme being? Was it God who stepped in and so providentially crafted the cosmos for our benefit? I suggest that it certainly was. Evolutionist William Stansfield, Ph.D., California Polytechnic Institute, or State University, stated, it is obvious that radiometric techniques may not be the absolute dating methods that they are claimed to be. I'm sure everyone in this audience, whether it be children in school, professors who chair departments, have relied very heavily on radiometric dating to show that the Earth is old. We've been talking about cosmological distances and factors which indicate that the universe may not be nearly as old as we had postulated, and the fact that there is design in the universe, throughout all the universe, and the fact that our minds actually bear a responsibility for some of the basic functioning of that universe at the energy level. That being the case, let's examine some of the internal structure, radioactive materials. This model solves a major problem. We have in the sedimentary deposits of the Earth worldwide radioactive materials. We have been able to calculate the rate at which they decay, and have been able to calculate by some forensic analysis that various individuals were there, that they've been caught as fossils. Forensic analysis can actually assign an age, a recent age, to certain activities, and then geological activities and paleontological activities can assign long ages, but often based on radiometric dating, carbon-14, etc. In the creation and symphony model, it solves the whole thing, because the internal structure of the Earth before the cataclysm of the flood held these radioactive elements in perfect balance, a controlled nuclear reactor. At the time of the flood, these were expunged, and they essentially have nothing to do with the age of the Earth. They have to do with the design of the Earth instead. So evolutionist William Stansfield wrote regarding radiometric techniques that it is obvious now that radiometric techniques may not be the absolute dating methods they're claimed to be. Age estimates on a given geological stratum by different radiometric methods are often quite different, sometimes by hundreds of millions of years. Did you get that? We think we have a handle, or that scholars have a handle, and you read in the newspaper that certain stratum was assigned a particular age, or a fossil, or a bone, or a skeleton assigned a particular age. Well, let's see if it really is that scientific. He stated that different methods often yield different ages, sometime by hundreds of millions of years. There's no absolutely reliable long-term radiological clock. That's a statement by a leader in the field of specialty. Evolutionist Frederick B. Junneman wrote, and I like this quote, "There's been in recent years the horrible realization that radio decay rates are not as constant as previously thought, nor are they immune to environmental influences. And this could mean that the atomic clocks are reset during some global disaster, and events which brought the Mesozoic, age of the dinosaurs, to a close may not be 65 million years old, but rather within the age and memory of man." Class, did you get that statement? A leading evolutionary scholar admits that when you put it all together, it's possible, since various factors reset the clocks, it's possible that the Mesozoic era, which is the era of the dinosaurs, you scholars will recognize it's Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous in period. It closed, according to evolutionary theory, 65 million years ago. But now there's the admission that actually it could have closed within the memory of man. And that is exactly what we are suggesting and stating. All the creation is recent. In the last session, we talked about the plants. Let me tie that in with this session, because everything is interrelated. Today we're going to get to the fish and the fowl, and hopefully we'll get further into the series. There is a plant called a voodoo lily. This lily relies on a beetle exclusively for its pollination. You see, all of these days have to be solar days. They have to be recent. The entire creation is systematically orchestrated to function as a single unit. The voodoo lily is pollinated exclusively by a beetle that responds to a particular odor. This plant, when it is ready to pollinate, actually raises its temperature by design as many as 35 degrees Fahrenheit. And in raising its temperature, it releases enzymes with the odor that attract the beetle. He proceeds within the lily, finds himself covered with pollen, proceeds to the next lily, and then the process closes. This means there was orchestrated design in the entire mechanism of interchange of information. Well, what God did on day number 1, 2, 3, and 4 was preparation for day number 5. On day number 5, God created the fish and the fowl. How large were the fish, or fishes? I hold the tooth of a shark. This shark was actually almost 100 feet long. There is no way in today's ecology and ecosphere we could grow a shark that large. There are reasons for that. In the pre-flood environment, the fish could get a lot larger. The entire biota was a lot larger. And that shark's tooth illustrates the fact that it was a lot larger. I'd like to emphasize that the fishes are very complicated creatures. Sharks are able to maintain an identification with their entire environment. They're able to pick up electric signals of anything alive or pulsating. They're able to function as responding to a universe of waters. Other fishes have amazing abilities. For instance, the dolphin is able to send out sonar, And he does it by using nasal sacs and the melon. He sends out impulses. They actually reverberate in a cavity of his skull. They're sent forth, and then they're picked up in a small bladder area and through a series of bones that then delicately connect with the middle ear. Very sophisticated sonar, so that he knows exactly where he is at all times. Along with a regular fish, there would of course be snails and other creatures. And here's a little snail that actually has darts. He actually produces a very delta streamlined dart that in today's ecology is toxic. But in the pre-flood world, we highly suspect that it would not be toxic at all, but would be beneficial instead. He actually is able to shoot this out a proboscis, and you'll see in the close-up there are additional darts that are generated. They are loaded. This is a designed structure. There is no way that evolution could produce anything comparable to this. One of my favorite fishes is the Rossi. The Rossi is an amazing creature. He's a small fish, very colorful. He's a cleaner fish. He's illustrated here in this book from Institute for Creation Research. The Rossi's a little cleaner fish. Larger fish have gotten their teeth and jaws dirty by eating other fish as carnivores and by eating plants. So there's a system whereby you have a colony of little Rossi. These fish are very colorful and very animated, and they stay in a primary area. Predator fish actually line up, waiting their turn to have their teeth cleaned. A dental assistant. The last predator fish goes right on by, the new predator fish swims in and waits. These little Rossi fish go in, clean his mouth, back off, and you'd think, well, the fish would say, the predator fish would say, I now have my teeth clean, I'm ready to start eating again. But he doesn't bother the benefactor fish at all. He goes off to another school of fish, and the next predator fish comes in line. Recognizing the necessity for these worldwide, the Creator designed a very novel way for procreation. The Rossi fish have in each little colony the domination of a male. The male fish is very colorful, and the females wait in line in the spawning process for the eggs to be fertilized, by the fish. And one male dominates that colony. So other males who are less dominant have to go on and seek for their own colony, but the Creator designed a special ability. They can go to search for their colony, or they can change sexes. In a matter of minutes, these less dominant Rossi fish that have wandered up see they're not going to be able to control the colony, so they get in line with the females, and in a matter of minutes they can transfer with the ability to have eggs actually fertilized. But now, in that transfer process, they get near another female and they start using antics. They start going into gyrations. And if they attract the attention of the female next to them, they just go on and start their own colony, and they stop the process of becoming a female. That way we have colonies dispersed throughout the aqueous nature, throughout the water system, with these little Rossis in their parts of the world doing a wonderful job. Creation is a far better explanation for that. I have no idea how an evolutionist would explain all of that fortuitous combination of circumstances and innate characteristics coming about by natural selection, mutational variation, or any system. So, only God can do that. Thus, we have on day number 5, the creation of the fishes. I've just touched a bare introduction to the marvel within the marine life. Now let's go to the birds. I love the birds. The marvel of the birds is absolutely astounding. Actually, we call it the miracle of the birds. Everyone loves a hummingbird. They are designed with beatific colors, designed with a beak that's able to probe into the inner parts of various flowers, and thus they cross-pollinate. Everyone loves, of course, the peacock and the bird of paradise. Birds have a miracle in design. Since they were designed to be avian, they have a very solid skull, but it's honeycombed so it will not be overweighted. And then the wing structure is not only honeycombed, it has struts in the design. It looks like an engineer designed those like you would design the wings of an airplane. Thus, the birds are very light and they're able to function in the atmosphere itself. These little hummingbirds actually use a figure 8 configuration in the flapping of their wings. Therefore, they're able to stabilize themselves, able to back up, go forward, up, down, sideways, in any direction. They are a marvel of design. But let's take that marvel of design a little further. The woodpecker is absolutely amazing. He's an endangered species in many parts of the world. The woodpecker is able to keep borings clean within trees, and we think that characteristic is a recessive genetic characteristic, but his design is absolutely amazing. His tongue is able to extend from 3 to 5 times its normal length because his tongue splits, wraps around his throat, and then wraps around his skull. It comes out his right nostril, again feathers together, unites, and extends for the purpose and design for which he was created. There is no way that design could be explained by, again, mutational variation, fortuitous combination of circumstances. Then the penguin. The penguin looks really awesome in awkwardness on land. But the moment he's in the water, he is able to do spirals and figure 8s and octagonal designs with a grace unmatched by anything else in all of creation. He's designed on day number 5 to enjoy the water and, of course, the atmosphere as well. The penguin, again, is a marvel of creation. We have for generations admired the ability of birds to migrate. Now, here we have the blackpoll warbler. And this little creature flies nonstop from New England to South America. And that's the metabolic equivalent of a human sprinting a 4-minute mile for 80 hours without stopping. Did you get that, class? That's the equivalent of a human being in his metabolic rate, a human being sprinting a 4-minute mile without stopping for 80 hours. That is absolutely amazing. The design of these creatures has to be very profound. And how do they navigate? They navigate by using the stars, by the sun, polarized light, the magnetic field, olfactory design like pine forest that would give a memory to them. They're able to hear and pick up low-frequency sonic vibrations caused by the wind that you and I couldn't hear at all. Again, this is a part of the design. I think one of my very favorite areas is the bee. The bee has the amazing ability to air condition his home. We're assuming that the flying insects were created on day number 5 and the rest of the insects on day number 6. He's able to keep his home at a 95-degree temperature. some of the worker bees will actually transport water from the outside, splash it on the sides of the hive in order to have it evaporate and cool the hive. Others are able to increase their metabolic rate and cluster in cold times to actually keep the temperature again inside the hive at 95 degrees. They use beeswax with absolute economy. They have a dance, and this dance is amazing. They use a configuration whereby they give the direction, they give the amount, they give the olfactory response and the satisfaction of the nectar or source. They give the distance so that any of the other bees can immediately go to the source of food. That communication has to be designed. But let me show you how they're also designed again with the rest of creation. On day number 3, we had the plants created. On day number 4, the stellar heavens. On day number 5, the fish and the fowl and the winged insects as well. All of it is interrelated. There is a lily that is pollinated in a very special way. The lily has a platform that looks identical to a female bumblebee. Now, the male bumblebee hatches before the female. He proceeds, and at exactly the same time of season, it's the pollination time for this bee lily. And the pollen are ready. The platform is ready. The platform in color, texture, and scent is identical to a female bumblebee. So the male bumblebee proceeds to mate, but he doesn't have any luck. In the meantime, he rubs pollen all over his face and proceeds for the next 2 or 3 hours to other bee orchids, in turn cross-pollinating them. Within a few hours, the female bumblebee has been hatched, and he sees he made a mistake, and he proceeds to be with her instead of with the orchid. In the meantime, the orchid has been pollinated, a miracle of God's special design. But I think my favorite of all is the songbird. The songbird produces his song not to attract a mate. A chirp will suffice for that. Not to identify himself with his species and variety. Other signals can do that. Birds have very sophisticated communication. But he produces the song just for the benefit of man. It takes a very complicated process. For instance, he has a relatively small set of lungs, but attached to those lungs he has large air sacs, and he has bronchial tubes, and these bronchi have valves. Here we have the lungs, the air sacs, the valve in the bronchi. Here we have the clavicular sac, which actually compresses around the membranes in the voice box. So as he compresses around the membranes in the voice box, as he inhales the air sufficient, he closes a valve in one of the bronchi tubes. He tenses the membrane, all of this simultaneously, and utters a note. Some birds, like the thrushes, can actually utter simultaneous notes that harmonize with each other. In addition to that, a songbird like the mockingbird is able to mimic sounds that he has just heard or sounds from other birds in their song. It's an amazingly delightful experience to hear the song and then to realize what's going on inside his designed body. There's a bird in Australia that's able to imitate any conceivable sound. He can imitate to some degree a human voice, the horn of a car, the whistle of a train, and any other bird in the forest. The melody by design of the songbird is a marvel of creation. So we have covered in this session the fish and the fowl of day number 5. Now let's proceed to day number 6. On day number 6, we have the creation of the dinosaurs, the land reptiles. The marine reptiles had been created on day number 5. Then we have the creation of the mammals, the rest of the insects, and finally, man. How large were those mammals? Throughout this series of lectures, I've been parading by this replica. This is a certified replica. The original is on display at West Texas State University in Canyon, Texas, excavated near Amarillo, Texas. This is an amazing specimen. What I'm holding is the fossil horns and skull of a bison, a buffalo, Bisoni latifrons. This bison, whose today's counterpart stands about 5 feet in stature, this bison, however, stood 10 feet at the shoulders. In addition to that, the horns extended on out beyond the slight area that's missing, covered a full 8-foot arc. This is the largest buffalo or bison ever found in all history, found in the sedimentary deposits. What this indicates is, in the past, mammals were larger. Camel remains have been found 19 feet tall. Beaver remains have been found 12 feet tall. It's absolutely astounding to realize that everything was larger in the past. Dragonflies that today have something like a 4-inch wingspan, in the fossil record had a 30 to 40-inch wingspan. Here is a 36-inch wingspan on a fossilized dragonfly. Actually, one was found in Italy with a 60-inch wingspan, a 5-foot wingspan to a dragonfly. Now, the evolutionary model has difficulty in explaining the existence of those creatures in such large forms. If we're supposed to be getting better, more viable, how is it that in the past things were larger than they are today? The evolutionary model has difficulty explaining that. However, the creation model has no difficulty at all. In the creation model, remember, we have the firmamental canopy above the earth filtering out the ultraviolet radiation. That ultraviolet radiation often diminishes the size of the embryo of mice in laboratory experiments. That would indicate that this influx of ultraviolet radiation is damaging us in so many areas. So when we did not have it, when the firmamental canopy filtered that out, then we certainly had the full embryological and genetic expression in its optimal form. Then when we add the atmospheric pressure, we solve a great problem. You see, I dig dinosaurs. I mean, literally dig dinosaurs. I have the privilege of being the discoverer and the director of the excavation of the largest and most complete Acrocanthosaurus ever found. Acrocanthosaurus looked a lot like Tyrannosaurus rex, except that he had spikes on the back of his neck and down through his shoulders and hip and all the way to near the bottom of his tail. The one that we found and excavated at Glen Rose stood approximately 20 feet tall and 40 feet long. Dinosaurs are very intriguing creatures. They were created on day number 6 of the creation. I have with me a very special fossil egg. The inset at the bottom of the screen will show details. A major hospital facility recently CAT scanned and x-rayed this egg for us. And it was so astounding that it's not even called an egg now, it's called a hatchling. And you will see some of that x-ray at the inset at the bottom of your screen. I want you to notice first the egg portions of the shell still intact. But notice under the cracked shell are body formations. Notice the skull, and that will show in the x-rays as well at the bottom of the screen. Notice the eye sockets and the little snout. If you can pull the camera in very closely, you'll see a nice little mouth registered. And then notice the neck, the shoulders, the hip structure. Now remember, this is an egg that's hatching. It's not an embryo. This is a little dinosaur coming out of an egg, so he's fully developed. The beautiful symmetrical hip structure, the area where the tail is formed and tucks, and then the tail is completely formed, and you'll see him wiggling that tail, working that tail out when he got caught in a tremendous catastrophe. Portions of the egg are still stuck to his tail. The tail fully developed, forms around, and tucks gently under his neck. This is most unusual. What they found as they x-rayed and CAT scanned this very unique and valuable specimen of a dinosaur egg or hatchling, what they found were various cavities. He was already breathing. The fluid had been expelled, and he was now breathing air and filling his lungs. This is rare indeed. Dinosaurs are an amazing part of the creation. But the evolutionary model has a problem relating to the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs have been used in the evolutionary model for decades to illustrate brute, distant, evolving life forms. They've illustrated the theory of evolution. We have one of my favorites illustrated here, and that's Pachycephalosaurus. Pachycephalosaurus means bone-headed lizard. But Buddy Davis, one of our consultants, who does work comparable to the Smithsonian, showed him in a profile that was delightful rather than brutish. But the dinosaurs had a problem in the evolutionary model. Let's see if I can clarify the problem and then address it and give an answer. Paleontologists were very hesitant to admit that the dinosaurs they excavated had very small rib cages, indicating small lungs. When we were excavating the Acrocanthosaurus near Glenrose, when I got into the rib cage, I was astounded. The ribs were only about 22 inches long. Very short, complete but very short, indicating a small lung capacity. How is it that a creature 20 feet tall, 40 feet long, supposedly a carnivore, could get enough oxygen to breathe in our atmosphere today? Well, the academic community of evolutionists finally said, we've solved the problem. Dr. Landis, U.S. Geological Survey, and others found air bubbles trapped in amber in the Cretaceous layering. Cretaceous, of course, means dinosaur remains are there. Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, all of the Mesozoic era indicate that dinosaur remains are there. We do not agree with the time scale of the evolutionary hypothesis, but we do agree that dinosaurs were there. Our position is they were created at the same time man was created. In fact, in the book of Job, chapter 40, verses 15 through 24, the biblical record states, "Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox." The Creator goes on to describe Behemoth as having a tail like an entire cedar tree, and as being the chief of the ways of God. What creature is the chief of the ways of God? I would suggest that it's the dinosaur. Seismosaurus is the largest dinosaur found to date, and he could raise his head 70 feet in the air, from snout to tail was 140 feet long, and weighed almost 200,000 pounds. Now, the evolutionary model has a difficulty. You see, by standard evolutionary geophysics, it is postulated that the Earth expanded from 60% of its current diameter to 100% of its current diameter. And during the Jurassic, just before the Cretaceous, was, according to evolutionary theory, 60% of its current diameter. But what they have not calculated is that if you maintain the same mass and shrink the volume, you invoke the universal law of gravitation, which means that Seismosaurus, that supposedly was a Jurassic dinosaur, Seismosaurus, who weighed almost 200,000 pounds, if living on a 60% diameter Earth, would weigh over 500,000 pounds. That's absolutely impossible. Now, let's get to the other area that's problematic for the evolutionist. How can these big dinosaurs with a bulk weight to oxygenate, that's almost 200,000 pounds, get enough oxygen to feed the deep cell tissue of their bodies when their lungs are rather small? Well, Dr. Landis and others suggested they found the answer, in a number of newspapers and a number of secular scientific journals paraded the information, saying that as they crushed these air bubbles of amber, they found 30 to 35% oxygen ratio compared to today's 20 or 21%. But they admitted that the pressure inside those bubbles was 8 to 9 times our current atmospheric pressure. Pressures like that can actually tend to bleed nitrogen ratio and thus conserve oxygen ratio. That being the case, their figures are highly suspect. But let's take it a step further. In our model, we have twice the atmospheric pressure, domination of magenta light, filtration of ultraviolet, 8 times the current carbon dioxide rate, bringing it from 0.026 to approximately 0.25%. But in recent weeks, we've also refined the model with very specific boundaries. It's been found that if you double the atmospheric pressure, you do something special. You're able to oxygenate the whole blood plasma. Back to the dinosaur problem. Secular researchers thought they had solved the problem by giving 30% to 35% oxygen ratio to the dinosaurs. But you have two problems there. That only saturates the hemoglobin with oxygen. It takes additional atmospheric pressure to saturate the blood plasma. The creation model, with 2 atmospheres of pressure, one above our current ambient atmosphere of pressure, actually solved the problem. But the ratio of oxygen has to remain low, down around 23 to 25%. Otherwise, you introduce volatility to the atmosphere. So the creation model solves the problem from every direction. Dinosaurs were a vital part of the creation. Now we come to a special area of consideration. Man. Man is very unique. In the next lecture, we will study just how unique man really is. But in the closing moments of this lecture, let's talk about fossil men, just for a brief period of time. I have the privilege of having excavated some very fine fossils. For instance, an Indian called Princess Petite, who is at the University of Texas in the Balcones Laboratory. And I have had the privilege of examining various artifacts at various parts of the world, having been in approximately 20 different countries. It is currently stated that the Australopithecines led finally to Cro-Magnon, through Homo habilis, Homo erectus, to Cro-Magnon, and of course to Neanderthal man. But in this ascent of man, there are various areas that have not been covered with academic research. Sir Solly Zuckerman, one of the world's leading physical anatomists, has examined the remains at Olduvai and also other remains of supposed early hominids. And he has stated unequivocally in scientific journals that if man evolved from ape, he didn't leave a single trace of his ascent from ape to man. He has stated that these remains of Homo habilis are actually the remains of an Australopithecine ape. Even Homo erectus could not actually walk erect. Recent studies have indicated, and scientific journals have published, the fact that the inner ear balance was insufficient for him to have walked erect. Man has always been man, has always been man. Mary Leakey published the famous Laetoli tracts that are certainly humanoid and I believe fully human. In fact, they have the great toe, the phalanges trench. They have, as I will point out in our Burdick footprint, the great toe, the phalanges trench, even though the four toes are not distinctive. They have the ball, metatarsal base, the interior longitudinal arch, the heel, the exterior longitudinal arch, and a slight bulge in the exterior longitudinal arch. All of these are unique to Homo sapien, to mankind. Now, mankind is also the only individual who is able, by design, to imprint. By imprint, we mean step deliberately within someone else's footprints. At Laetoli, you have three sets of prints, one stepping in another and another and another. Thus, you actually have Homo sapien. You have man. You do not have an early form of Homo. In our research at Glenrose, our excavations have proceeded to the point where we have excavated a major dinosaur, 208 dinosaur footprints, and 57 human footprints within those dinosaur footprints. A number of those footprints have the great toe, the four other toes, or at least the phalanges trench, the ball, metatarsal arch, medial and longitudinal arches, and the bulge in the lateral arch, the longitudinal arch. There's no question that we have evidence that man and dinosaur lived contemporaneously. Leading evolutionary scholars Milde and Schaefersman admitted that if man and dinosaur lived contemporaneously, that totally destroys the concept of evolution. And I certainly agree with that part of their postulate. So we've come to the conclusion of this discussion, introducing man. It is not the purpose of this series of lectures to go at length into the hominids and the supposed fossils, but evidence currently indicates that man, dinosaur, and all of man's supposed predecessors lived parallel, lived simultaneously. Therefore, there is no precursor leading one vector to another, as Stephen Jay Gould indicated. It looks like creation matches all of the criteria, not only as a bona fide scientific explanation for life origins, but as a superior, the superior explanation for life origins. In our next session, don't miss our consideration of the uniqueness of man.
Our next exciting venture leads us into the wonders of the creation. Around us resides the beauty of God's handiwork.